10 years may sound like a long time, but when it comes to social media, many people do not realize how much of their lives have quietly been shaped by endless feeds, notifications, and constant digital stimulation. Because unlike smoking or unhealthy eating, the effects of social media are often invisible and develop gradually, making them difficult to notice in the moment. And if someone spends only 2 hours a day on social media, that adds up to more than 7,000 hours over 10 years, which is nearly an entire year spent looking at screens. And for many people, the actual number is much higher. And during those thousands of hours, the brain is exposed to a non-stop stream of information, emotions, comparisons, opinions, and rewards. And although social media itself is not necessarily harmful, the way modern platforms are designed has changed the environment in which the human brain operates. And one of the biggest changes involves attention. Because the brain evolved in a world where information arrives slowly, that social media delivers new content every few seconds, creating an endless cycle of novelty. And over time, the brain begins adapting to this environment by expecting constant stimulation and frequent rewards, making patience and sustained focus more difficult because the reward system becomes accustomed to rapid changes and immediate gratification. And as this pattern repeats day after day, year after year, many people begin noticing that they struggle to remain focused on books, conversations, work, or activities that require long periods of concentration. Not because their intelligence has decreased, but because their brains have adapted to a world where something new is always one swipe away. Another major effect involves dopamine, which is often associated with reward and motivation, because every notification, message, like, comment, or interesting post creates small bursts of anticipation. And over years of repeated exposure, the brain becomes increasingly sensitive to novelty. And this can lead to situations where ordinary activities feel less exciting compared to the endless stimulation provided by digital platforms. And things that once brought satisfaction, such as reading, spending time outside, or even relaxing quietly, may begin feeling strangely boring, not because they have lost their value, but because the reward system has become used to much higher levels of stimulation. And another change that often develops slowly involves boredom, because boredom once played an important role in creativity, reflection, and problem-solving. But after years of immediately filling every empty moment with content, many people find it difficult to simply sit quietly without reaching for their phones. And over time, the brain starts associating boredom with discomfort, rather than seeing it as a natural part of life. And while these changes happen gradually, they reveal something important, which is that the brain is highly adaptable and constantly adjusts itself to the environments it experiences most often. And after 10 years in the world of social media, the environment itself may have quietly reshaped the way attention, motivation, and reward operate without people fully realizing it. Another major area affected by 10 years of social media use involves emotional health, because humans naturally compare themselves to others, and social media creates an environment where people are constantly exposed to carefully selected highlights of other people's lives. And while these images and videos may not represent reality, the brain often reacts to them as though they do. And over time, repeated exposure to idealized lifestyles, achievements, appearances, and experiences can create feelings of inadequacy, dissatisfaction, and the sense that everyone else is doing better, even when this is not actually true. And because these comparisons occur thousands of times over many years, they can slowly influence self-esteem and emotional well-being without individuals realizing the source of those feelings. Another important change involves stress, because social media connects people to an endless flow of news, arguments, tragedies, controversies, and emotional content from all around the world. And while humans evolved to deal with immediate problems within their communities, modern technology exposes the brain to countless events that it cannot control. And this constant exposure may contribute to feelings of anxiety, mental exhaustion, and emotional overload, because the nervous system was never designed to process such a large amount of information every single day. And another effect that often develops involves sleep, because many people use social media before bed, and over years this habit can interfere with natural sleep rhythms by exposing the brain to stimulation and bright light at times when it should be preparing for rest. And even small reductions in sleep quality, repeated over long periods, can influence energy, mood, memory, and overall health. And one of the more surprising consequences of social media involves memory itself, because when information is constantly available, the brain may become less motivated to store details internally, since it knows they can easily be accessed later. And while this does not necessarily mean social media causes memory loss, it may change the way people interact with information, making them more likely to skim content quickly rather than deeply engage with it. And over time, this can affect learning and retention, because attention and memory are closely connected. And another phenomenon that has become increasingly common is the fear of missing out, where people constantly feel that something better, more exciting, or more important is happening elsewhere. And after years of exposure, this mindset can make it difficult to fully enjoy the present moment, because attention is always being pulled toward what others are doing. And perhaps one of the most powerful changes is that social media gradually alters perceptions of normal life, because constant exposure to extraordinary experiences, wealth, beauty, success, and entertainment can make ordinary life appear dull by comparison, even though ordinary life is where most meaningful experiences actually occur. And this shift in perception may explain why many people feel restless, dissatisfied, or unable to appreciate simple moments after spending years immersed in digital environments designed to maximize engagement. Beyond emotions and attention, social media may also influence relationships, because humans evolved through direct interactions involving facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, and physical presence. But digital communication changes many of these experiences, and while social media can strengthen connections and help people stay in touch, it may also create situations where individuals have hundreds or even thousands of online connections, yet still experience loneliness, because quantity does not always equal quality. And after years of relying heavily on digital communication, some people discover that they spend less time engaging in deeper conversations and more time consuming information passively. And over time, this can affect feelings of belonging and emotional support. Another important issue involves identity, because social media encourages people to present versions of themselves to others. And after years of carefully selecting photos, sharing opinions, and monitoring reactions, some individuals may begin tying their self-worth to external validation, where likes, comments, and followers influence how they feel about themselves. And while most people understand logically that numbers on a screen do not determine personal value, the emotional systems inside the brain do not always respond according to logic, and repeated patterns of seeking approval can gradually strengthen these associations. Another effect involves productivity, because social media platforms compete aggressively for attention, using algorithms specifically designed to maximize engagement. And over 10 years, countless moments that could have been spent learning, creating, exercising, or developing skills may instead be absorbed by endless scrolling. And although each session might only last a few minutes, these minutes accumulate into thousands of hours over a decade. And perhaps one of the greatest costs of those hours is not the time itself, but the opportunities they replace, because time spent on one activity cannot simultaneously be spent on another. And another fascinating change involves patience, because social media delivers information instantly, allowing people to satisfy curiosity almost immediately. And while convenience has many benefits, it may also reduce tolerance for delays, making waiting feel increasingly uncomfortable and causing frustration to appear more quickly when results are not immediate. And this shift may influence everything from relationships to learning, because many valuable goals require long periods of effort without instant rewards. And after years of living in an environment optimized for speed, patience itself may become more difficult to maintain. And another area affected is creativity, because creativity often emerges during moments of quiet reflection, boredom, and mental wandering. But if every spare moment is filled with digital stimulation, the brain has fewer opportunities to connect ideas and generate new thoughts. And over long periods, this lack of mental space may influence imagination and innovation. And perhaps one of the most ironic aspects of social media is that platforms designed to help people connect may sometimes leave individuals feeling more distracted, isolated, and disconnected from themselves. Because genuine fulfillment often means happiness comes not from endless consumption, but from meaningful experiences, relationships, and activities that engage the mind more deeply. After 10 years of social media, the most important thing to understand is that the brain itself is not broken. Because the human brain has always adapted to the environments it experiences, and social media simply represents one of the most powerful environments humans have ever created. Because never before in history have people had access to unlimited information, entertainment, validation, and stimulation 24 hours a day. And while this environment offers enormous benefits, it also presents challenges that previous generations never faced. And perhaps one of the biggest changes after a decade of social media is not any single effect, but the overall shift in how attention is distributed. Because attention is one of the most valuable resources humans possess. And wherever attention goes, thoughts, emotions, habits, and experiences tend to follow. And over years of constant notifications, feeds, and digital distractions, many people gradually lose control over where their attention goes. Not because they lack discipline, but because they are interacting with systems specifically engineered to capture and hold it. And this is why so many individuals describe feeling constantly distracted, mentally exhausted, or unable to enjoy simple experiences, because their brains have become accustomed to environments filled with endless stimulation. And yet, despite these changes, the remarkable thing about the brain is its ability to adapt in both directions. Because just as 10 years of social media can reshape patterns of attention and reward, different habits can gradually reshape them again. And many people who reduce screen time, spend more time in nature, read books, practice hobbies, or simply allow themselves to experience boredom often report improvements in focus, emotional balance, and overall well-being. Because the brain responds to whatever environment it repeatedly experiences. And perhaps this reveals an important truth, which is that technology itself is neither good nor bad, but the way humans interact with it determines its effects. And social media can educate, inspire, entertain, and connect people across the world. But when it begins replacing sleep, relationships, movement, reflection, and real experiences, the balance shifts, and the costs become more noticeable. And ultimately, the story of the brain after 10 years of social media is not a story about damage, but about adaptation, because the brain has simply been responding to the world it was given. And understanding that process helps explain why modern life feels so different from the lives humans lived for thousands of years. And why so many people today struggle with focus, stress, boredom, and dissatisfaction, despite having access to more information and entertainment than any generation before them. Because perhaps the greatest challenge of the modern age is not the lack of stimulation, but learning how to live in a world where stimulation never ends. And where protecting attention may become one of the most important skills a person can develop.